The military has been deployed in Botswana to oversee the distribution of medical supplies. And people believe this is the early sign of a coup brewing. That's because there has never been a coup in Botswana. For decades, the nation stood apart on a continent where instability was too often the rule rather than the exception. Botswana was the diamond miracle, a quiet success story in Africa, where its resources were used to build schools, pave roads, fund healthcare, and maintain relatively stable politics. But that narrative is collapsing before our very eyes. Now the country is in free fall. Its economy has collapsed to the brink of zero growth. Hospitals are declaring emergencies due to a lack of medicine, and invoices to government suppliers sit unpaid. Citizens whisper about instability, and the military has been called to oversee the supply of medical goods. A country once celebrated for its stability now faces the exact conditions that breed coups: economic despair, public health collapse, and a government forced into emergency measures. And so the haunting question rises: what really happened to Botswana? Did the diamond miracle simply run out of steam? Or is there something far more sinister at play? Perhaps Western sabotage of an African government that dared to prioritize sovereignty over multinational profits? In this video, let's find out. For decades, Botswana was the darling of African development narratives. In a continent too often stereotyped by outsiders as unstable or mismanaged, Botswana was held up as the glittering exception. Its partnership with De Beers through the Botswana joint venture was often presented as proof that African nations could manage resource wealth responsibly. The country invested diamond revenues into schools, clinics, infrastructure, and welfare programs, earning international praise and a reputation for stability. Nearly 80% of its exports came from diamonds, and close to a third of its government revenue was tied to the mineral. For years, this arrangement seemed unshakable, and the West paraded Botswana's success as a model of how cooperation with foreign corporations could supposedly benefit Africa. But behind the shimmering surface of prosperity was fragility. Diamonds were never just a lifeline. They were also a leash. Botswana was celebrated, yes, but it was celebrated precisely because it stayed within the lines drawn by its Western partners. The West knew that keeping Botswana tied to a single commodity would ensure dependency. Why encourage investment in manufacturing, agriculture, or technology when diamonds alone could keep the country afloat? Why support true economic diversification when dependency guaranteed leverage? For as long as global markets boomed, Botswana thrived. Yet when demand fell, the fragility of this model became painfully clear. That fragility is now fully exposed. Global diamond demand has plummeted in recent years, driven both by weaker luxury markets and the rise of synthetic alternatives. Botswana's sales collapsed by nearly 50% in a single year. Mines that once symbolized national wealth are closing, and the revenues that made Botswana solvent are evaporating. The government's projection of 3.3% growth for 2025 has already been revised downward to close to zero. The International Monetary Fund goes even further, predicting contraction after an already devastating 3% decline in 2024. For a nation tied so closely to one industry, this is suffocation. The diamond that once shone as Botswana's glory has now become its trap. The consequences of this collapse are not confined to budget statements. They are felt most directly in the lives of ordinary citizens, and nowhere is this clearer than in the public health sector. On August 25th, President Duma Boko declared a public health emergency. For a country once lauded for its healthcare system, particularly its world-renowned fight against HIV, the announcement was shocking. Hospitals and clinics were running out of essential medicines. Cancer patients could not access treatment. HIV patients, whose lives depended on antiretroviral supplies, were stranded. Even basic items, such as surgical sutures and dressings, had disappeared from stockrooms. This was not just about shortages of supplies. It was about the collapse of dignity in a system once considered a continental model. Botswana had long been celebrated for managing HIV better than almost any African state. International partners proudly pointed to their role in this achievement, with PEPFAR, the U.S. President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, financing nearly a third of Botswana's HIV services. Yet when the diamond revenues dried up and the new government under Duma Boko shifted its rhetoric toward African self-reliance, Western donors quietly began to pull back. Funding that once sustained HIV and tuberculosis programs evaporated just as Botswana's fiscal crisis deepened. Surgeries were postponed, referrals abroad canceled, and long-term dispensing programs suspended. The timing of this retreat is too sharp to ignore. For years, the West showcased Botswana as its success story, parading its aid programs as evidence of partnership. But the moment Botswana's leadership began charting a sovereignty-driven course, those very programs shrank. It was as though the message was being sent: align with us, and we sustain you. Step away from us, and we cut the strings. This is not a coincidence. It is leverage. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. All this brings us to the political shift that has made Botswana a target. The election of President Duma Boko represented more than just a change in leadership. It was a statement of intent. Unlike his predecessors, who cautiously maintained ties with Western corporations and adhered to externally guided economic advice, Boko campaigned on an Africa-first platform. He spoke openly about diversifying the economy, reducing dependency on diamonds, and pursuing deeper partnerships with African nations. He promised that Botswana would no longer be a diamond colony, endlessly supplying stones while foreign companies extracted wealth. Instead, he wanted to build local capacity, expand agriculture, invest in technology, and strengthen public systems. Such a stance was revolutionary, but it also carried consequences. The West has a long history of punishing African governments that step out of line. From Thomas Sankare's Burkina Faso to Patrice Lumumba's Congo to today's juntas in Mali and Niger, leaders who challenged the West's dominance faced sanctions, isolation, or outright destabilization. It should therefore surprise no one that as soon as Botswana signaled its intent to take a new path, the country's fortunes shifted with suspicious speed. Diamond revenues collapsed, aid was withdrawn, and international institutions painted an increasingly bleak picture of Botswana's economic prospects. The downturn may have roots in global markets, but the severity of Botswana's fall cannot be separated from the political context. As the crisis deepened, Botswana entered the most dangerous territory any African state can face, the conditions that create the ground for a coup. Economic collapse breeds desperation. Public health emergencies erode trust in government. Rising unemployment, exacerbated by Botswana's decision to lay off 1,000 workers, nearly 20% of its staff, creates unrest, especially among the youth. The government's liquidity crisis, leaving suppliers unpaid and services starved of funding, further weakens confidence, and into this volatile environment stepped the military. The government called on the armed forces to oversee supply chains for medicines and essential goods, hoping to stabilize the situation. While this may have seemed pragmatic, history across Africa shows how quickly such arrangements can spiral. When militaries are entrusted with civilian responsibilities, they often gain political leverage, and once they taste influence, they rarely retreat willingly. Botswana, long considered immune to coups, now faces the uncomfortable reality that its exceptionalism may not withstand the combined pressures of fiscal collapse, social unrest, and creeping militarization. The question that arises is not whether Botswana's military desires power. It is whether external actors are laying the groundwork for regime change. Who benefits if Botswana is destabilized? Certainly not Africa. A coup would undermine one of the continent's most stable states, disrupting regional integration and setting back democratic progress. But for the West, a coup might serve as a convenient correction. a way to restore a government more aligned with corporate dependency and foreign control. The very policies Boko is advancing, like diversification, African partnerships, and sovereignty, are precisely those that threaten Western leverage. To see the outlines of this sabotage, one only has to examine the timing of events. Botswana elects a government that talks about putting Africans before foreign companies. Soon after, Western aid contracts, diamond revenues collapse at a suspiciously steep pace, and international institutions warn of disaster. The government falls into liquidity crises, hospitals lack medicine, and whispers of instability begin to circulate. This is the classic playbook: use commodity markets and aid dependency as tools of punishment. When an African government aligns with the West, funding flows and markets stabilize. When it seeks sovereignty, the tap closes and crises multiply. In the midst of these power struggles, the heaviest burden falls on ordinary Botswana. Families that once relied on diamond jobs now face unemployment in a country where over a quarter of the workforce was already jobless. Patients who once trusted in Botswana's healthcare system now find themselves without treatment for life-threatening conditions. Schools suffer as government revenues decline, and farmers struggle as state support weakens. Yet, despite their suffering, many citizens quietly support Boko's vision. They know that dependency on diamonds and Western aid is not sustainable. They have watched wealth flow outward to corporations while their own communities remained vulnerable. For them, sovereignty, however painful in the short term, is the only path to dignity in the long term. The risk lies in patience. How long can a population endure such hardship before frustration turns into unrest? And how long before Western interests exploit that unrest to delegitimize the government and push for change under the guise of restoring stability? In every African crisis, there are two battles: the people's struggle for survival and the external manipulation of that struggle for strategic ends. Now, whether a coup materializes remains uncertain. But what is certain is that Botswana now stands at a crossroads. If it bows to dependency and external pressure, it risks losing the sovereignty its people crave. If it holds firm, diversifies its economy, and strengthens its African alliances, it can turn this crisis into a transformation. The West may see Botswana's fall as a market story, but for Africa, it is a struggle for destiny. What do you think? Is Botswana collapsing because diamonds failed, or because the West cannot tolerate an Africa that stands on its own? With the military now managing medicine supplies, are we watching the early stages of a coup in a country that has never had one before? Tell us, if Botswana falls, does it prove that no African nation is safe once it tries to break free from Western control? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.